By all accounts, I should be talking about War and Peace. That's the work by Tolstoy that we analyzed ad nauseum in high school. But as I was making other episodes, this pattern of female characters emerged. So I've decided to talk about Anna Karenina now and make myself suffer for War and Peace again some other time. Normally, I start these episodes by talking about the author, not only because that's how we approached literature in school, but also to provide some context on the epoch and the author. In some cases, it's more important than the others. This time, I've decided to do something a little bit different, and I will talk about Tolstoy, but I want to look at him through the experiences of his wife, Sofia. And by the end, you should be able to understand why I'm choosing to do that. Sofia Bers was born 1844 in a noble family. They actually lived in Kremlin. That threw me off completely. Apparently at the time you could just rent an apartment there and live there. The family was long friends with the Tolstoys, and for some time the expectation was that Lev Tolstoy would take the older sister Lisa. But upon one visit of the family to the Tolstoy estate Yasnaya Polyana, Sofia caught his eye and he fell in love with her. Lev at the time was already famous in the society. His first novel, Childhood, saw the light 10 years prior, and his Sevastopol novels have also brought him fame. He was not, however, a hottest bachelor out there. Apparently he was not that good looking or charming, so the girls were not necessarily lining enough to marry him. But Sofia did end up liking him, and she even fell in love with him. So when he proposed, she accepted. The year was 1862. Sofia was 17 to 18 years old at the time. Tolstoy was 34. As you can imagine, he's already lived a little bit of a life. He was an average scholar at the university. He was much more interested in the social scene. So once he's inherited the estate in Yasnaya Polyana, he quit university and installed himself there. He also had some gambling problems. He even gambled the estate away at one point, but did manage to get it back. And obviously he's already had some love affairs. One notable one was with a peasant woman from his estate, and she even gave birth to his child, who later served as the coachman for the Tolstoys. And Tolstoy believed that since his bride was so much younger than him and has not lived his life with him, she needs to know all of this. So he gave her his diaries to read a day or two before the wedding. Sophie was, appalled, horrified, and she spent the night crying. But she also said in her diaries that she understood who Tolstoy was. And the wedding happened. They married in Kremlin. Tolstoy was late to the wedding because he couldn't choose a white shirt quickly enough. But they married and they departed for Yasnaya Polyana that same day. The wedding night happened on the way to the country estate, by some accounts either at the roadside inn or straight up in the carriage. Both Lev and Sofia kept extensive diaries throughout the whole life, so we are privy to some details of that night and the aftermath. Sofia was obviously inexperienced, but seemingly nobody told her what would be expected of her in the marital bed, so she was a little bit terrified by Lev's demands. Lev, on the other hand, was succinct in his description. He wrote in his diary, "She's not the one." It got better with time, though. The early stages of their marriage are described as happier ones, but in my opinion, it only speaks to the absolute shit show that's going to happen later, so that's fun. They installed in Yasnaya Polyana quite a change for an 18-year-old Sofia who spent her whole life in the big city, and now she has to manage this huge estate. Lev has always wanted a big family as well. He's lost his parents very young, and Sofia gets pregnant pretty quickly. Overall, she gave birth to 13 children. 8 of them lived into adulthood. I think she also had a number of miscarriages. Tolstoy knew that his mother gave birth to him on this particular leather couch in Yasnaya Polyana, so he expected Sofia to give birth to all of their children there as well. After the first childbirth, which was incredibly difficult for Sofia, she developed a condition called mastitis, an inflammation of the breast tissue, which made breastfeeding incredibly painful for her. But Lev forbade her from hiring a wet nurse, and so she ended up breastfeeding almost all of their children against doctor's orders. Lev's explanation was that it's your womanly duty, so that's what you're meant for, so no, you're not getting a wet nurse. He also insisted on quick return to their sex life. Their second child was born a year after the first, and arguably Sofia was not either healed nor ready for it. She even wrote in her diary something like, "Why can't he wait? What is it about men? Why cannot he wait for me to heal?" After their fifth child, the doctors warned her not to have any more children, as it would be dangerous not only for the children, but for her as well. But Lev was insistent: "You either continue having children or I'm divorcing you." And so she did. She gave birth to more children, but most of them died at a very young age. And despite this apparent desire for a big family, Lev showed very little interest or affection towards his children. Everything to do with their upbringing and education was Sofia's responsibility, in addition to the household chores. That was the source of the conflict for the longest while, because he saw her as wife, mother, and caretaker, and she wanted to be treated as a person. She was educated, she had opinions of her own, but Lev put her in this particular strict box with rules and expectations, and everything intellectual he would outsource to other people, sometimes women, and Sofia was incredibly jealous because of it. So imagine this woman, she's either constantly pregnant or with a small child on her arm, there are children running around, she's managing the country estate, but she's also supposed to manage the financial side of things because Lev cannot be trusted with it. Lev was already a famous author by that point, so he wrote these monumental novels, but his handwriting is so incomprehensible that the only person who could understand it was Sofia. So she, every night, having completed all of her chores and everything that she needed to do, she would take the pages that he's written that day, she would write them up in the night, so in the morning when he wakes up, he could start editing them. Anecdotally, she rewrote War and Peace like 7 times by hand, and it's even bigger than Anna Karenina, it's huge. All this went for a little while, and then Lev's antics became weirder and weirder. He's always held this belief in the value of manual labor. He preached asceticism. He believed that a simple life, a life of a peasant, is the one to strive for. But this belief, it transformed into something completely different. He denied the value of material possessions, that they should give it all away, all of their money, the housing, everything. At one point, he tried to persuade Sofia that for their whole big family, they only need 3 rooms. One for the girls, one for the boys, and one for when somebody gets so sick and tired of everybody else that they just need a breather in there. Sofia shut that down pretty quickly. Imagine, they have at least 8 children at any point in time, so that's not sustainable. And then Tolstoy went further and further into his pseudo-philosophy that even got a title, Tolstoyism. He denied all material possessions, so a compromise was reached that everything that he owned was signed over to his children, so Lev didn't nominally own anything. He started sewing his own clothes and shoes. He would go out into the field with a man. He became a vegetarian. He renounced the teachings of the Christian church so that he was almost anathemized but wasn't. He rewrote the Bible so that Jesus Christ was just a man and not the Son of God. And he was just this moral ideal for the man. And keep in mind, he is a nobleman. He's a count, and a famous one, so he started gathering followers. And he obviously was preaching it to his family. The children gave up on mowing pretty quickly. But one of the breaking points for Sofia was when he tried to sign away his rights to his novels. He believed that they need to be given to the public domain. And Sofia lost it because it was the main source of the income for the big family. So another compromise was reached that everything that Tolstoy has written by that point, and that included the most famous works like War and Peace and Anna Karenina, that was all signed over to Sofia and the children, and everything that he wrote from that point on would be given into the public domain. Sofia also went to see Dostoevsky's wife, who was publishing her husband's works herself, and she taught Sofia the tips and tricks of the trade, so Sofia also started publishing her husband's works. The family life was also suffering from Tolstoy's eccentricities. Morals and philosophy aside, Tolstoy, for example, used to be incredibly jealous. He once kicked a man out because he sat next to Sofia, and Tolstoy didn't like it. But then, as his worldview changed, he wrote a controversial piece called The Kreutzer Sonata that read incredibly autobiographical, but also was very scathing towards Sofia. In there, he also said that sex, even between married people, is immoral and shouldn't have happened. And Sofia was kind of very distressed about this description of their family life. And honestly, this whole life, it's taken its toll on Sofia. All these responsibilities, the children, money, Tolstoy's antics. She either had anxiety or at least she was suffering from depression. There is a sad story at the end there that her last child, a favorite, a boy called Vanya, he died at 7 years old, and that threw her into the pits of the depression. Tolstoy wasn't helpful or supportive either. The Kreutzer Sonata just came out. But Sofia had a friend, a music teacher called Taneev. He used to come to the estate, she would go to see him, and she built some sort of camaraderie with him. Maybe she loved him, maybe she didn't. He was gay. It was all completely platonic. She just needed a companion. But as the rumors started to spread, how dare she, the wife of the famous Tolstoy, this man completely cut off all communication with her, thus leaving her alone to deal with her grief and depression. And that's quite sad, I think. But the jealousy fits have not stopped for either one of them. Tolstoy used to follow her around, peeking into windows just to see what she's doing. But as the relationship deteriorated between them, Sofia was also in this constant thought process that he's cheating on her. He started hiding his diaries from her, so she would be constantly seeking evidence that he's no longer faithful to her. Sofia was also very jealous of the man named Chertkov, an avid follower of Tolstoy. She believed him to be a terrible influence on him. It was actually Chertkov's idea that Tolstoy needs to give away the rights to his novels. Tolstoy would meet him in the forest and she would follow them there, hiding in the bushes. It got bonkers by the end there. And one night after one of the fights in November 1910, Tolstoy packed a bag and left the estate. He left Sofia a note. She almost drowned herself in the pond out of despair. They had to drag her out. But then the note came that Tolstoy caught pneumonia on the way and was now basically dying in the house of the railway station master. And the family went there. Chertkov was also there for some reason. But Sofia was not let in to see him before he passed away November 20th, 1910. And Sofia lived for another 9 years. She managed to get a pension from Nikolai II, and she preserved all the furnishings and personal belongings of Lev. This estate became a Tolstoy museum during her lifetime, and she even was the one to give the first tours around here. So what about Tolstoy's works? We're here to talk Anna Karenina, after all. Well, one thing is that all of the Tolstoy's works are heavily influenced and inspired by real-life events and real people. The novels are not truly autobiographical, even things like Childhood. They draw heavily from life, but he puts a lot of fiction in. In novels such as War and Peace and Anna Karenina, the characters are built on real people. Natasha Rostova, for example, in War and Peace, is built mostly on Tatiana Biers, Sofia's younger sister. Her first ball is exactly replicated. Tolstoy even took Tatiana there. But adult Natasha is more based on Sofia herself. Anna Karenina is infused with characters that come from real life. Konstantin Levin is an avatar for Tolstoy, and his relationship with Kitty draws a lot from Tolstoy's own marriage to Sofia. Anna Karenina had multiple prototypes. For her appearance, Tolstoy used Maria Gartung, the daughter of Alexander Pushkin, the famous poet. Her life story is built out of the two notable divorces of that time, Sofia Bakhmetova and Maria Sukhotina, and her fate comes from Anna Pirogova. She was Tolstoy's neighbor, housekeeper, and lover, and once in a fit of jealousy she threw herself under a train. Tolstoy even got to go and see her dismembered corpse. In the earlier drafts, Anna Karenina was supposed to drown herself, like many women in Russian literature before her, but this fate of Anna Pirogova also sealed her fate. Tolstoy started working on Anna Karenina in 1873, but quickly lost interest. What spurred him on was the advance payment from the magazine Русский Вестник, so he persevered. He finished the novel around 1877. The novel was first published chapter by chapter in that magazine, except for the last part of it, because of the political stance of the editor. He didn't want to put the Serbian war into his magazine, and so the full complete novel saw the light 1878. The thing to keep in mind is that Anna Karenina was written at a time where Tolstoy's own views on life, marriage, and faith were changing and transforming. The story that was originally supposed to be a love triangle got consumed more and more by Levin, and thus by Tolstoy's own ponderings on meaning, life, and moral. Tolstoy was also growing more tired of the novel, so that would explain a little bit the back end of the book. We open to the character of Steve Oblonsky, who got caught cheating on his wife, and she's now threatening to leave him, so he summons his sister from St. Petersburg to reason with her. At the same time, his friend Konstantin Levin arrives in Moscow to propose to Kitty Sharbatskaya, whom he has been in love with. He hasn't seen her in a little while now, so in that time she has already fallen in love with somebody else with a name named Vronsky. So when Levin goes to propose to her, she declines, and he flees from Moscow in despair. As Steva goes to pick up his sister from the train station, he runs into Vronsky, who is there to pick up his mother. As it turns out, the sister, our Anna Karenina, has spent the train ride with the Countess Vronskaya, and so all of them gather in a train carriage as they wait for the commotion to settle down, because the man was just crashed on the train tracks. Anna manages to persuade Dolly not to leave her husband, and whilst Anna is in town, she agrees to go to a ball. At the ball, Kitty expects Vronsky to, if not propose to her, but at least to dance with her. But he spends his entire night with Anna. Kitty feels betrayed, understands that the proposal is not meant to be, and falls ill. Anna leaves for St. Petersburg, where her husband and child await. But as she exits on the train station there, Vronsky is just there. He's followed her. And so he starts to 19th century stalk her. He goes everywhere where she could potentially be. And so eventually she gives in and begins an affair with him. As the rumors start to spread, Karenin asks her about it, but she denies it all, and he chooses to believe her. Vronsky is not happy with the situation. He doesn't like hiding, and it all comes to a culmination one night when Anna tells him that she's pregnant. That same night, Vronsky is participating in a horse race, and he falls off the horse somewhere off the view of spectators. Anna is very much distraught about his well-being, thus exposing her relationship to him, to the society, and to Karenin. Karenin takes her home and spends his night pondering his situation that he's found himself in because of this vicious woman, and comes to the conclusion that allowing her a divorce would only give her what she wants, and she needs to be punished. Thus, he asks her to break off her relationship with Vronsky, and he would allow her to stay a good wife. Anna complies. Vronsky does not expect such a turn of events and even tries to shoot himself, but misses. Meanwhile, Kitty is taken to Europe to improve her health, but really to heal her broken heart. There she meets a girl who's the epitome of the helpful virtue, and Kitty tries to emulate her but fails, and understands that her destiny is different, but she does not yet understand what it is, and she returns to Russia to her sister's Dolly country estate. She's seen arriving there by Levin, who's spent his time trying to forget her. Levin spends his time managing his own country estate. He believes himself to be the innovator. He has these ideas about the land and the common man. He waxes poetics about the Russian land, about the Russian peasant man. He even goes to mow with the men. And he believes that he's found the true meaning of life in this simple life and in manual labor. Back in St. Petersburg, Anna goes through a terrible labor. Nurses and doctors believe that she's not going to make it. She's delirious, constantly asking for Karenin and Vronsky. Karenin, in a moment of compassion, I guess, he summons Vronsky to say goodbye to her. In the same moment, he also gives her forgiveness, as he believes that she's not going to make it. She does pull through, though, and Karenin instantly regrets his forgiveness that he's given her. He also becomes quite fond of her daughter that carries his name but not blood. Anna, however, cannot continue living a lie. She takes her daughter and leaves to now live with Vronsky as his mistress, since Karenin has not given her a divorce. And Anna and Vronsky depart for Europe. Levin goes to visit Sherbatsky and meets Kitty for the first time in a long while. Both realize that they are meant for each other and they marry almost instantly. Levin's brother also dies and Levin gets to contemplate his own mortality. Anna and Vronsky return to Russia. Anna sneaks into Karenin's house to see her son Serezha. They don't get to spend too much time together, and seemingly this reunion only serves to pain them more. Arguments start between Anna and Vronsky about their status. Anna is no longer accepted in the society. She gets openly mocked when she tries to go to the theater, so they decide to leave for the country. At Levin's estate, we see the early stages of the marriage between Kitty and Levin. Kitty's family is visiting. They bring like a distant relative of hers that pays her special attention, and Levin goes into a jealousy fit that kicks him out. Levin then goes to Zemsky election, where he huffs in disdain the entire time. He there runs into Vronsky, who is very much engaged in the politics of it all. He serves as a local judge and believes it all to be of value. This trip for Vronsky is incredibly difficult on Anna, who cannot stand to be separated from him. So after another argument, she agrees to write to Karenin asking for divorce, and they both go to Moscow. Levin and Kitty, in anticipation of her labor, also come to Moscow. And at one point, Stiva drags Levin to Anna and Vronsky's place for tea or something. And then we're treated to a fit of jealousy from Kitty. Kitty gives birth to their child, daughter, after hours of difficult labor, and as Levin gets present his child, the only thing that he feels towards this child is disgust. Stiva gets buried in debt more and more, and he finds a position in St. Petersburg that is not important but pays well, so he decides to go there to try and schmooze the decision makers. Anna asks him at the same time to speak to Karenin and ask him about the letter that she's written to him and about the possibility of a divorce. Karenin, meanwhile, has fallen under the influence of one of the women there, and she manages to persuade him not to give Anna the divorce, and Stiva leaves them quite disgusted. This ambiguous situation aggravates Anna and Vronsky more and more. Their arguments become more systematic. Anna is jealous of all the women around him. Their fights become more calculated. They seem to want to hurt one another. Anna's mental state deteriorates. She starts taking morphine to help her sleep. And after one of the arguments, Vronsky leaves to see his mother. Anna is all over the place, believing that he no longer loves her, that he's abandoned her, that he's found another woman, and works herself up to a state where she has nothing to live for if she doesn't have him. She sends him a note, then she decides to go after him. As she boards the train, she works herself up more and more, kind of pondering her situation, the society, Vronsky, Karenin, Serezha. At one point on the station, she even gets a response from Vronsky, but she is in no state to comprehend anything. One of the last thoughts that she has is that she wants to get rid of herself and to punish him, and she throws herself under the train. In the final part of the book, Levin's brother travels to his estate. In the train, he runs into Countess Vronska and the man himself. We get the backfill of the aftermath of Anna's suicide. Vronsky arrived at that station that day and even got to see her disfigured corpse. He was suicidal, tried to shoot himself once again, but the family managed to save him from it. And now he's traveling as a volunteer to the Serbian war, and we can imagine that's a suicide mission for him. At this stage, we are treated to one last mental exercise from Levin as he finds true faith and God. The end. In comparison to War and Peace, Anna Karenina doesn't have any kind of monumental historical events happening. The entire story is built on relationships and interpersonal communication, or lack thereof. Tolstoy writes in the style of realism. He's depicting the contemporary society for him of the 19th century Russia. The point of view character changes every other chapter or series of chapters. He even gives voice sometimes to secondary and tertiary characters. There's a terrible chapter, for example, when Anna and Vronsky travel to Europe and they meet a painter who believes them to be shallow and uninteresting, but still craves their validation. I genuinely cannot read it as anything else as another self-insert from Tolstoy and what he thinks of his readers, which is patently probably not true, but I have no other idea as to why it's in there. There is another where Levin and Stiva go on a hunt, and Levin is trying to subtly compete with Stiva, and he's also very scathing towards another companion of theirs who's there for a good time and not dick measuring. And there is even a chapter with a hunt dog's POV. What the heck was that? But the center stage is obviously these three families, Karenins plus Vronsky, Levins and Oblonsky. So in order for us to understand the themes, I want to take a look at the characters. Do we believe that Tolstoy knows how to write women? I was thinking about it lately, not only as it relates to Tolstoy, but in general. Our impression of women of the epoch comes from literature written by men. Tolstoy actually serves as a good example here because he is a known misogynist, so can we trust him to write women and do them justice? We have three female characters here, Dolly, Kitty and Anna. There are others sprinkled throughout, but there are even more caricatures on women. Dolly and Kitty are the epitome of the obedient wife type. Dolly more overtly so because her husband is a good-for-nothing, cheating spender. And everybody knows it, she knows it, and not only does she decide to stay with him, but also to allow this behavior to continue. Yes, there is an argument that it's very easy for us to look on her and her life choices from the 21st century, and there is even confirmation in the text there that getting a divorce is very difficult. But the way that the text is written, it feels like in the beginning she has that option of taking the kids and going to the country estate and leaving him behind, and by the end she's given all of her possessions to help him settle his debts, and she even is forced to move in with Kitty and Levin, and for all intents and purposes rely on their charity because Levin sees it as such. Seemingly, she had this chance of escaping Stiva in the beginning, but by the end of the book she's given it all away. Kitty is not much better off, really. Levin is a slightly better man than Stiva, but he's still very much a slave to his moods, random fits of jealousy, competitiveness, insecurity, and Kitty is forced to manage his moods for him more often than not. Levin also thinks very highly of himself. The predominant emotion that he feels towards others is pity. And he displays it towards his family, his wife's family, his child, and on occasion towards his wife. I don't know about you, but that's not the emotion that I want my husband to feel towards me. It feels like Kitty should have had a character arc. There are markings of it throughout the text. She puts a stake on the wrong man, gets betrayed by him, goes to Europe to heal her broken heart, meets a girl who shows her a different way of life, and Kitty even tries it out for herself. But upon her return to Russia, she seemingly regresses to her previous state. And ultimately she becomes a good wife for a man she was supposedly destined for. Arguably, Kitty was always supposed to become this woman, and this European stunt only serves to show her true purpose. But Kitty has no character. She has no distinctive characteristics to her beyond she's nice. Queer sidebar: if the text was written now, I would have wanted her to run away with that female friend from Europe, because I'm getting strong lesbian vibes from the both of them, even in the text as it's written now. But as it stands now, she's meant to be this quiet wife for Levin, somehow a reward for him. Her only characteristic is this nurturing presence that she has about her. We can see that in a scene where Levin's brother dies, and honestly, she will need that in order to coexist with Levin. And then there is Anna. Anna does defy societal expectations of her, and she even becomes the pariah of Russian society. Nominally an action of a strong woman, but she's still very much defined by what people around her think of her. She's constantly seeking validation from people who still pay her visits. That's the first thing that she asks of Dolly when she comes to see her. What do you think of my situation? And eventually her dominant emotion becomes shame and guilt. She constantly feels guilty about her situation, the state that she has put Karenin in, Vronsky in, Seryoja. She doesn't feel sorry for herself. It's that Christian thing of deserving punishment. She even says it as such, that she deserves it. And yet she's still very much the image of the accommodating female. That's the impression that Levin gets from her once he goes to see her, that she made him feel like he was the most important person in the room. Even when she had opinions of her own, she still managed to make her companions feel at center stage. She also has this presence of a beautiful woman that Dolly and even Kitty lack, this natural charisma that draws men to her, and she knows it too. Anna is unfulfilled in life. She has no purpose, really. She tries to seek out other occupations and engagements when she feels like Vronsky is drawing away from her, but it's all a way to fill time. Nothing excites her, not even her own daughter. So the question is, what would bring her purpose? The only thing to bring her happiness was seemingly to have Vronsky around at all times, but not only is that not realistic, but I don't see that bringing her too much joy either. She goes from loving Vronsky to doubting him, to competing with him, to punishing him, and it's all in order to get attention from him. And we know that's not sustainable either. So at one point, she's decided that Vronsky doesn't love her anymore, and if she doesn't have his love, then there is nothing for her to live for. And even in that last moment, she wants to get rid of herself and to punish him. Critics like to imply that Anna was ostracized from the society and that was a huge blow to her, which is fair, and that's what drove her to suicide. But I don't feel like it's well supported in the text. There is a difference in the way that society treats Vronsky and Karenin and the way it treats Anna, and that's a good social commentary on the society of that time and now even, and I would have understood if that's what drove her to the train tracks, but that's not how the text plays it. All of her existence relies on this one man, and that's not the situation you want to be in. Not only is it not fair on him, but if you remove him from the equation, obviously your only way is suicide. Tolstoy writes female characters who have no purpose outside of their husbands and lovers. We can assume that it speaks to the society of that time and the woman's role and the position in it, but it also speaks to Tolstoy's own opinion on women. At that point in his life, his ideal woman is a wife and a mother. Tolstoy also struggled with his own sexuality in the way that he expressed it, so Anna choosing passion would have also been frowned upon by Tolstoy. I was looking at these female characters, trying to define them, find a distinctive characteristic between them, and I'm drawing a blank here. Even Anna's passion, her defiance, it's all an afterthought. She was perfectly happy maintaining the status quo with Karenin and having an affair with Vronsky on the side. It's just that the situation played out differently for her. Even her suicide, it's all driven by her want to punish Vronsky, at least in part. So motivations for all three male characters are very much the same, and there is little different between them. Is Tolstoy any better at writing male characters then? Yes, in a way that they are at least distinctive between one another and have different motivations and tics about them, but I do hate them all. Vronsky, less out of all of them. I remember I felt quite sorry for him on my first reading of the novel way back when, more than 15 years ago now. And I think I felt the same thing this time around. There's a certain honesty about him. Even in his deception of Kitty, it is framed as if he has not promised her anything, thus doesn't owe her anything. Strictly speaking, yes, he did lead her on. Yes, a gentleman would have proposed. But I'm not saying that he's a completely morally superior character. He has a set of rules in his own mind that he follows and he abides by them. Especially with Anna, he's as honest with her as he can be. He seeks out ways for them to be happy, as misguided as some of those attempts were. He lacks this air of being judgmental that the society around him carries. He does not believe himself to be above others. There is no superiority to him, which could be expected of his background and character type. He should be this thoughtless jock that adaptations sometimes paint him as, but in the text I don't read him as such. His inner monologue on his feelings for Anna reads genuine. He feels torn between this desire to love her and find meaning in that, and feeling guilty that he needs more in life than just this feeling, when Anna, in contrast, supposedly only needs him. He may not be that talented of a painter or writer or whatever it is that he sets himself to, as some snobbish painters in the book would tell us, but he's genuine, he's generous. Yes, he may care about his status, but that's the society that he lives in. I don't judge him for it. Anna in the end does. When her thoughts deteriorate to blaming him, she believes that yes, he loved her, but he also wanted her for his image, for his pride, as a conquest. I'm not discounting it fully, but I do believe that he loved her first, and everything else was just an added bonus. And I do feel sorry for him in the end. I somehow remembered him dying, like in the text, and not just going off to this war. But we can assume that's a suicide mission for him, a more noble way for him to die, since realistically he died along with Anna. Vronsky deserved better. Everyone else I hate. I'm not even going to talk about Stiva because he's awful in a very straightforward way, but I don't even want to talk about Levin, but we need to, so I'm going to stick to him and Karenin. Karenin is a weird fellow. He's portrayed as a very cold, closed-off individual who is not in contact with his emotions. There is a scene in there where he says that he doesn't like when people cry in front of him because he doesn't know how to process that emotion. Any confrontation with Anna, he leaves to think it all over, and he spends a lot of time contemplating everything, looking at it from whatever angle, and then only then does he come to whatever conclusion. He's the same way with his son, only praising him for whatever academic success that he had and not showing any true affection towards him. That was Anna's job and she quit from it. As far as Karenin goes, there are 2 points that I wanted to make. He, as Levin, believes himself to be above others, to have this moral high ground. He thinks of himself in the highest esteem. He holds the prestigious governmental position, but at the end of the book it also says that he's lost his acclaim and he does not hold any power anymore. But there is a weird turn for his character in the end that I do not fully get. He falls into the influence of a woman to whom he then defers all decisions concerning Anna, but they also both listen to some charlatan who claims to be a psychic. I don't know what to make of this turn. Karenin has always seemed to be the man of logic, sometimes to a fault. And now what? Is that the power of love that he feels for Lydia? A weird turn, and I do not have a good explanation here. The second thing about Karenin is the prevalent theme for a lot of characters of shame, guilt, and punishment. From this high horse that he's installed himself on, he believes himself to be a innocent victim of Anna's deception, that he carries no responsibility for whatever happened in their relationship, and in true Christian fashion believes that Anna is going to be judged by the higher power. In the same breath, however, he also wants to punish her for the affront that she's caused him, thus not allowing her to see Serежа, not giving her the divorce, because these two things would bring her happiness and she is not worthy of them. That same thought process is carried later by Anna herself, as she exists as Vronsky's mistress and is ostracized from the society. She, for the longest time, doesn't even ask for divorce because she believes that to be her punishment for her misdeeds. The only reasonable one is Vronsky, who's like, hey, let's resolve this. Nobody's happy at the moment. You'll get a divorce, we will marry, that returns some status to Anna, and we could all move on. And yet, especially by the end where Anna starts blaming Vronsky and they get into more arguments, they seemingly all get stuck in this cycle and the circle of punishing one another, and there is no escaping from it. And then there is Levin, my sweet summer child. I hate you most of all. Levin is obviously a self-insert from Tolstoy, an avatar for his thoughts and ideology. And so Tolstoy uses him to present his own views on the perfect life and the perfect man. The problem? Levin, and then by extension Tolstoy, is incredibly judgmental, stuck-up, prideful. He spews pseudo-philosophical nonsense every other page, and he also believes himself to hold the moral high ground in all situations possible. There are a lot of autobiographical elements in Levin. His views on the land, on the man, going to more with the man, having suicidal thoughts after his brother's death, his marriage to Kitty, the jealousy fits, him coming to the faith outside of the Christian teachings. All of this and more comes from Tolstoy. And keep in mind, half of this book is all about Levin. Adaptations normally downplay his presence in the story, but arguably you could call him the main character of the story. Tolstoy presents him as the opposition to Anna, but I got tired of him really quickly, and that made reading that last part of the book quite difficult because it's very Levin heavy. And it was even before I kind of refreshed my memory on Tolstoy himself, so it's not my opinion of Tolstoy that's clouding my impression of Levin. It's just that they are the same person and not a particularly nice one. The critical reading of the novel is that Tolstoy contrasts two unions, Anna and Vronsky versus Kitty and Levin. The former built on passion out of wedlock and with a tragic end, and the latter the epitome of the happy union written in the stars. If you read like a detailed analysis of this contrast, there are specific scenes that present these anti-parallels in the text. And obviously Tolstoy also presents the moral lesson here, that this animalistic passion cannot lead to a happy union, and the quiet coming together of Kitty and Levin is the ideal marriage. That is also why Karenin's marriage fails, because it is not built on love. You can either agree or disagree with Tolstoy on the moral angle here, but what I want to point out to you is that the marriage between Kitty and Levin is not a happy one either. Tolstoy wrote them based on the early stages of his own marriage to Sofia, and from the biography recap we can probably agree that it was a troubled union. Both men take younger girls as their brides, both men show no interest in their children, all parties involved are prone to fits of jealousy. There is a scene in the book where a distant relative of Kitty's comes to visit and pays her special attention, and Levin storms off, throws a hissy fit, then berates Kitty and kicks this man out the next morning. This is an almost exact recreation of the situation that happened to Tolstoy. A friend simply sat next to Sofia, and Tolstoy stormed off in a jealousy fit and threw him out. Kitty and Sofia also get jealous. Kitty over Anna, Sofia over many women, and Chertkov. Does the juxtaposition of Anna and Vronsky and Levin's work then? It doesn't for me, but maybe it did for Tolstoy. Because he presents the failing of Anna and Vronsky's union partially on the sexual nature of their union, and we know that Tolstoy struggled with his own expressions of sexuality and where it ended up. For me, the problem is Tolstoy not giving Anna any more dimension beyond her feelings for Vronsky. So of course they cannot connect. There is nothing to her. Tolstoy claims that Levin and Kitty's union is happier, but in reality, it's just simply her submitting to him. So of course it's a happier marriage for Levin, as it was for Tolstoy for a little while. But if we don't conform to this patriarchal norm, neither union works, so the juxtaposition of them doesn't work either. And again, maybe it's not fair to apply my feminist views to the piece, but if the moral doesn't work anymore, what is left? And I think Anna Karenina works in the historical context. It's a good representation of the society of that time and women's role in it. It would be faulty to apply 21st century morals to the text. If you wanted to modernize it, you can. It doesn't even take too far leaps of logic to do that. But if you do, all three female characters suffer quite a bit. We write more complex female characters these days. Their sole motivation lies in their men and society's expectations of them. And while that's still true for some women, and I'm not judging here, you do you, but it's no longer the only option. And I think that's where I got stuck, really. I want more diversity in my female characters, and Anna Karenina is not the place to find it. In conclusion, it's a perfectly acceptable piece of literature. I had no problem going through it, reading it. The plot moves at a pace, the character motivations are present, even if I don't like the characters that much. It's because they are just crappy people, not that they're written poorly. And again, it's a very subjective thing. It's also a good representation of the society of that time, so if you're interested in that, you go for it. But the book of Anna Karenina is quite different from its adaptations and what the public knows of it. So if you want to truly understand it, you will have to read all of this.